The NHL schedule has a hard time keeping a delicate balance of managing back-to-back games where teams will play games in consecutive nights. So whenever some teams in a specific year end up with more back-to-backs in a season than other teams, they almost feel like they're at a slight disadvantage due to the fact that they played tired more often than those other teams. However, the Boston Bruins and the New York Rangers of 1959 would look at these teams nowadays and simply laugh at them. Just once before 1959 had the NHL sent two franchises over to Europe to play in promotional games to spread the play of the NHL. That was when they sent the Red Wings and the Habs to play games in England and France in 1938. Now, 20 years later, the NHL was ready to set up another round of promotional games in Europe. But this time, they had to go all out to try and make the biggest and greatest impression on the foreign crowd. After the 1958-59 season, where the Boston Bruins finished 2nd out of 6 teams, and the Rangers finished 5th out of 6 teams, alongside some players from the Chicago Blackhawks, they were directed to Europe on one of the greatest hockey journeys to ever take place in the name of promoting the NHL. Now, there are a few differences between North American hockey and European hockey, especially in the 1950s. First, the European playing surface is bigger compared to the North American playing surface, meaning that players have a little more time to make decisions as well as having to traverse through more space. Second, most fans in Europe at that time were used to a nicer form of hockey, so to say. They were used to a type of hockey where an emphasis was more on passing plays, dekes, and anything easy on the eyes, similar to soccer. But NHL hockey at that time was not very easy on the eyes. The Bruins and Rangers are as tough of a team as any, and they were used to laying out big hits, engaging in scrums, and the sort of classic North American hockey style. Because of this, a lot of the European fans weren't too thrilled when they'd watch the Rangers and Bruins play against each other, many calling their playstyles ugly. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. So while we can't fully state whether or not the success of the trip was large, what we can look at and admire is the sheer size of the schedule that these two teams had to follow. This European trip would start on April 29th, 1959, where the two teams would play their first game in London, England. And the last game of the trip would be in Vienna, Austria on May 24th. So if we just look at these 2 dates, we can see that the trip lasted 26 total days. And afterwards, the two teams would head home. But try to guess how many days off these two teams had. Go for it, guess. If you guessed that these two teams had 3 days off, you'd be right. So they didn't have a lot of time for sightseeing. Now let's take a quick look at how their games across Europe were broken down. On April 29th and 30th, the first 2 days of the tour, the two teams played in London, England. On May 1st, they had their first off day. Now from May 2nd to May 10th, the two teams would play every day, jumping into a new country every few days. May 2nd and 3rd, they were in Geneva, Switzerland. May 4th and 5th, they played in Paris, France. On May 6th through 8th, the two sides faced off in Antwerp, Belgium. And on May 9 and 10, to finish off the long streak, the two sides played in Zurich, Switzerland, where they had a day off on May 11th. This streak of 9 consecutive days of games played is not only the longest streak that I could find of teams playing against one opponent in a set number of days, but also the longest streak I could find of teams playing professional hockey at all, in consecutive days. Given the needs and requirements in today's game for players to properly rest and rehab, this streak of 9 consecutive professional games is kind of crazy to think about. But remember, we're only about halfway through the European trip at this point. Following that, the two sides played in 2 smaller 6-game streaks, where they hit up German cities Dortmund, Essen, Krefeld, and Berlin, until they finally finished up their NHL European tour in Vienna, Austria, playing there from May 22nd to May 24th. And in the end, the Rangers ended up quote-unquote winning the trip with a record of 11 wins, 9 losses, and 3 ties against the Bruins. So whatever that means, but good for them and congratulations. But like I said before, if this trip wasn't fully successful in terms of fan engagement, was there anything good that actually came out of it? Well, yeah, there actually was, and you could argue that it was actually league changing. At that point in time, Bobby Hull wasn't exactly the star that we know of him as today, but he was a part of the Blackhawks crew that tagged along on this trip. And according to him, the extra open ice of the European playing surface allowed him to blossom as a player, letting him realize himself just how good of a player he actually was. The European trip was a confident boost for Bobby Hull, and you can see that truth based off of his own stats. In the 1958-59 season, he scored 50 points in 70 games played. But in the 1959-60 season, following the Europe trip, Hull put up 81 points in 70 games, winning the scoring title that year. And the next year after that, he'd helped the Blackhawks win their franchise's 3rd ever Stanley Cup. Logistically, the 1959 NHL European Tour was crazy, but it allowed the NHL to reach a part of the world it had barely touched before, while also allowing an NHL great to blossom. But most impressive of all is the crazy streak of games that all those guys had to play in, for a crowd that maybe didn't much care for them at all. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one.